Sky threatening rain, not a drop. The cool, dreary weather indicative of the sentiment of my heart. A bagpipe played Amazing Grace as church members walked to the graveside. Joining them, I mourned the loss of Darcy Ann Ramos, a baby girl I hardly knew. My 11-year-old eyes perceived this as a tragedy. But 5 years later, I see it with different eyes. As I look back, I realize now that day was not only about mourning the loss of Darcy, but also about celebrating her life. I don't see a baby who would have been better off not living. No, I see a life affected by a syndrome leading to a decision that impacted many for a lifetime. The news of Darcy came as a surprise to the Ramos family. While unexpected, the Ramoses were delighted that God had blessed them with a seventh child. But just 2 weeks into the pregnancy, Tracy knew something was wrong. She writes in her online journal, which later became a published book entitled Letters to Darcy. This was my first real scare. I started having crippling pains and bleeding. I just knew I was going to lose you. I was devastated. I knew I was given this seventh chance, and now it was over. I gave up all hope. An initial sonogram produced a good report. However, the bleeding continued. The crippling pains intensified. She returned to her doctor. His words shattered the Ramos' world. Not compatible with life. With the words of her doctor haunting her, she learned the name of her baby's condition. Tracy and Jason soon became experts on trisomy 18, a fatal disease that claims 90 to 95% of affected infants. According to trisomy18.org, trisomy 18 occurs when an extra 18th chromosome is present in most, if not every cell of the child. The outcome of this syndrome is very sobering. The Orphanet Journal of Rare Diseases says that only 50% of babies with trisomy 18 live longer than 1 week, and approximately 5 to 10% beyond the first year. Many parents are encouraged to abort, a position seen as merciful by the National Institutes for Health. Quote, "There is something profoundly troubling about allowing the birth of an infant who is known in advance to suffer from some serious disease or defect, while the prevention of that suffering is attained by eliminating the potential sufferer. Many would consider it an act of mercy," end quote. Yet the Ramoses understood that no one escapes suffering and living life. And more importantly, they knew that the fear of suffering, hardship, and the unknown could not justify ending a life. The Ramos family knew little Darcy would suffer, but they trusted Romans 8:28. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. The decision to keep Darcy was challenging. Darcy had cysts in her brain, a hole running through all 4 chambers of her heart, rocker bottom feet, and clenched fists. The odds were against her. In Randy Alcorn's book, Pro-Life Answers to Pro-Choice Arguments, he analyzes abortions in cases of fatal diseases and deformities. Mr. Alcorn tells the story of a medical professor who gives his students a case study involving a father with syphilis and a mother with tuberculosis. 2 of their 4 children have disabilities. 1 dies and the 4th has tuberculosis. He asks the question, if the mother were to become pregnant again, would you advise an abortion? One student, thinking the answer quite obvious, answers that he would advise an abortion. "Congratulations," the professor responds. "You have just killed Beethoven." Mr. Alcorn powerfully demonstrates that those who are most likely to suffer are sometimes those who most impact the world. Darcy was one of those people. The online journal that Tracy kept allowed for people all over the world to hear Darcy's story. including people from the UK, India, Dubai, and Hungary. Once when Tracy doubted her decision to allow the public to follow her journal, her husband told her about a woman at work who had 2 children and insisted she would have an abortion if she got pregnant again. A few weeks later, after reading about Darcy online, she said she would actually refuse one. A month before Darcy was born, Tracy visited her doctor for a level 2 ultrasound, producing astounding news. Darcy's brain cysts were gone. They could no longer detect her hernia, and despite the hole in her heart, she was doing quite well. What a testimony of God's sovereignty. Despite this display of God's power to defy doctors, the Ramos' doctors remained skeptical. The question lingered: how much time would God allow them? Sunday, September 27th, 2008. Darcy was born at 9:52 p.m., weighing 4 pounds, 7 ounces. Day 2. Darcy beat the doctor's odds and lived past 24 hours. She was even able to go home, another impossible milestone. Day 5 eventually came. Darcy struggled with breathing and low oxygen levels, but God's plan had more in store for Darcy. Birthdays were now celebrated in days, not years. Each night, the Ramos family gathered to celebrate another day God had given them with her. They even made a bucket list for Darcy, which included things like swinging with mommy, feeling the warm Texas sun, and going to church. In the late hours of day 8, after their celebration, Darcy stopped breathing. After 10 minutes of fervent prayer, CPR, and a reminder to Darcy that she still needed to check off going to church, Darcy opened her eyes and took a huge breath. It was hard to watch Darcy struggle, and after 2 more times of having to resuscitate her that night, she lived. But the Ramoses decided that was the last time they would ask that of Darcy. So was the suffering of that week worth it? The Ramoses resoundingly declared yes. Tracy explains why in this letter to Darcy. Right before the service, we read from your blog page about a woman who came back to the arms of God after losing her faith, and that your story had impacted her to the point of returning to him. I wondered, what a wonderful thing that God used you to do that for him. A child that only lived 15 days after birth, who never spoke a single word, had life-changing, even eternal impact. And I learned in my interview with Tracy and Jason that they still receive letters and emails from those who are inspired by Darcy's life. You see, Darcy was more than just an infant who lived longer than expected. Darcy was an instrument in God's orchestra, performing a ballad of hope. Keeping her meant late nights, every night, and the emotional torture of knowing she could die any moment. Ending her life in the womb, however, would have exacted a greater toll. One of Tracy's letters explains, the truth is, having an abortion does not make this journey painless. Neither does carrying to term. Pain is always going to be a part of the decision. The difference is, choosing to abort you would have denied me the wonderful blessing of knowing you and all the blessings that have come about from your birth. God used Darcy's very short life to do what some of us won't do in a lifetime. The value of life isn't measured by its potential length or lack of suffering. The value of a life is without measure because each is unique in its impact. Jeremiah 1:5 says that before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations. Darcy was God's little prophet. In just a few short days, she brought many the message of hope. When I was 11, I didn't realize the true impact that Darcy had made, or would continue to make. I had no idea such a life could have an impact. Being a church member with the Ramos family, however, has not only allowed me to learn of an amazing life, but also be touched by it as well. I would challenge you to not be influenced by the belief that the value of life is measured by the world's standard of quality, but rather see that every life has value and is worth living. Thank you.